Night Special. I'm John Barron.
I'm Chazza Chidolo.
If you're just joining us, the result of the US presidential election hangs in the balance this evening. Joe Biden appears to have the likelier path to victory. He's leading in the popular vote and he's leading in the electoral college vote as well. But Trump has significantly outperformed his polls again, deja vu 2016, and there is a lot of uncertainty. And frankly, Chaz, these guys aren't helping anything.
It's not my place or Donald Trump's place to declare who's won this election. That's the decision of the American people. But I'm optimistic about this outcome.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. We did win this election.
Oh, don't look now, Chaz. We've got breaking news. Oh. Breaking news. What is it?
Sorry with the sting. By the way, before I tell you the breaking news, are we going to have to put up with those horns forever with Joe Biden every time he talks? It's like a footy grand final afterwards. Yeah. Anyway, breaking news.
Yes.
Pennsylvania is in on the game as well. Last time we checked in on Pennsylvania, they had 74% counted and there was a 12.7% margin. That's a big margin, John. 1% more has been counted, 75%. Now it's an 11.5% margin, which is still a big margin.
In 1%.
But it's 1.2% down.
Okay, well, which again rather supports the argument that Celinda Lake was making in the last hour, that they feel as though they have banked enough of these early postal and in-person votes to get over the top in the Rust Belt.
They do, but remember what I said about 7 counties that supported Trump last election hadn't started counting their mail-in votes.
Yeah, well, look, coming up shortly, we're going to speak to Never Trump Republican Senator Jeff Flake. But first, let's get some reaction from one of the icons of American political science, Dr. Larry Sabato of the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia. Larry, what is the story so far? What can we say at this point?
This is a nail biter. It really is. There are some very close states that will determine the presidential election, but there are also big chunks of vote that are out. In most cases, it's early votes. You'd think that would help Biden, but in some cases it hasn't. So this is very much up in the air. I think nobody would be foolish enough to call it, but I can guarantee you some fools will.
I'm definitely not going to ask you to call it, Larry. All it seems we know for sure so far is that Florida, one of the most overpolled states in the country, gave us a dramatically different result to what the polls suggested yet again in an election.
Yes.
Do you have any idea what went on in Florida?
I am so glad I'm not a pollster because there are so many people on both sides that are coming to get them. I hope they're ready, but they had 4 years to correct their problems. They had 4 years. Anybody can screw up once, as in 2016, but to do it again and with the same candidate, Donald Trump, and a lot of the same conditions, really, it's inexcusable. And they'll come up with 15 reasons why it happened, and I'm going to turn the TV off at the 3rd reason.
Larry, a lot of Democrats who expected to do better in some of those states like Florida and Georgia and even Texas is still that Democrat pipe dream, are now quite nervous about the Rust Belt. How long could it be before, if this stays close, how long could it be before we know?
Well, we're going to know at various points. That is, we'll have a count at some point, and then the lawsuits will start. And then the courts will rule, and then somebody will appeal the court decision. And, you know, I don't know. I know it has to be resolved one way or the other by January 20th. And I hope it will be resolved, you know, much earlier than that. We have the meeting of the Electoral College in mid-December. So, you know, the time is limited, and one just can't say at this point because we don't know how close it really is.
I know it's too early for hindsight because there's all kinds of outcomes that might take place from here, but are you at a point where you could confidently say that either Biden or Trump made a particular mistake in their campaign?
Oh, I think you'd have to list mistakes on both sides. These were not the best campaigns I've ever seen. For one thing, Donald Trump as an incumbent president was even more difficult than he was as a challenging candidate in 2016. And on the campaign trail, rather than driving home his message, he would talk about his grievances and attack this one and attack that one. And that's not what you do when you're the incumbent president of the United States. Now, if he wins, everybody will say, oh, that was great. But actually, January 1st, before the pandemic started, he was substantially favored to win a second term. Now he's fighting for every vote. It's pretty clear already that Biden will win the popular vote probably by more than Hillary Clinton did. Donald Trump, if he wins, and that's by no means certain, but if he wins, he'll be the first president in American history never to have won the popular vote while serving 2 terms. We are such a divided country. This doesn't help.
Larry Sabato, we so appreciate your time once again. Thank you.
It was fun. Thank you.
And I've got breaking news!
What? What's the breaking news? What's the breaking news?
There's no more results, but I just want to let you know I forgot my shirt in that last interview. That's an embarrassing contribution. Sorry about that.
I'm personally glad that you are not wearing the same T-shirt all day. We've been at this for about 12 or 13 hours already. Now, look, even though many Republicans tried to stop Donald Trump becoming their candidate 4 years ago, since then, most of them have fallen into line behind their president, but not all of them. Former Arizona Republican Senator Jeff Flake was one of Trump's most vocal internal critics until he retired last year for exactly that reason. Jeff Flake spoke to us earlier from his home in Arizona, which has now been won by Joe Biden. Well, first of all, Senator Jeff Flake, welcome back to the program.
It's great to be here.
Since we last spoke to you, since we last spoke to you at the start of this year, you've come out and endorsed Joe Biden, a Democrat, for president. Why did you, a lifelong Republican, do that?
Well, as a conservative, I felt that the future for Republicans under President Trump just isn't good. Future for conservatism under President Trump is not good. Anger and resentment are not a governing philosophy, and soon enough it runs its course. We've got to appeal to a broader electorate, not just kind of drill down more on our base, and that's what the president has done. So I just don't think that there's any future with Trumpism.
If we head now into a period of 2 or 3 weeks of accusations, lawsuits, recriminations, and grievance, regardless of who comes out on top at the end of that, how does America come back together?
Well, I can't control what the president does, and he is likely to challenge, the results if he loses. He's said that, but I wouldn't expect any of the institutions of government that matter to go along with him if he hasn't won a genuine election. I think Americans are being conditioned to wait a while. I'm hopeful that the country is prepared for it. But I can tell you, if the president is expecting my former colleagues in the Senate or the House or the courts or the military or any institutions of government to back him up, if he hasn't won a genuine election, he's mistaken. They won't.
That's a very interesting comment, Senator. So you think this could be the moment when we see the Conservative establishment really breaking with President Trump if they feel as though he's trying to do something nefarious?
Yes. And I just think that that is a bridge too far for the president to try to claim that he's won an election when he hasn't. So, I mean, he could win. We still don't know. He could win a genuine election, but people are going to wait for the votes to be counted.
Senator, you've said that you support Joe Biden for the presidency, but hope that Republicans can retain majority control of the Senate. That seems to be effectively saying that you want Donald Trump to be defeated, Joe Biden to be a president who can't get anything done.
I'm a conservative. Gridlock is usually a wonderful thing. So I like my government slow and boring. I mean, So yes, divided government is usually the best government. And if you look at the big challenges that we have to face, our looming debt and deficit, for example, dealing with climate change or immigration issues, those issues are only going to be solved when the parties come together. And it's unlikely that if one party controls the presidency and both chambers that that party will move ahead on any of these issues. They just won't assume the political risk involved. It has to be both parties kind of holding hands and jumping together.
Finally, Senator, let's just say when all the votes are counted, turns out the polls were wrong again and Donald Trump has surprised us all with another election victory. What are the implications of that in your mind?
Well, for the party, I'm very concerned about what another 4 years will get us. And if we continue to see the decimation of the party down ballot, lost the House, likely lose the Senate, and in state legislatures as well, where redistricting will happen in the next 2 years. Who draws those lines? If we have bigger majorities on the Democratic side drawing those lines, that will favor the Democrats even further. So I don't think it's a good picture in terms of the world and our trustworthiness and reliability as a strategic partner and a trade partner. That's been in question, and I think the world is just kind of waiting us out, hoping that the old America will reemerge. If it's another 4 years, that'll be very difficult. What could have been seen as an aberration would be seen as a trend, and that's very troubling.
Jeff Flake, a pleasure to talk to you again. Thanks for your time.
You bet. Great to talk to you again.
Who would have thought that Arizona is now more left-wing than Florida?
Pretty extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, 2020 is full of surprises. And nothing is more surprising than the fact that we have an exclusive interview with President Trump himself.
This is huge.
Yeah, Mr. President, how are you feeling?
Woo! You know, it was never in doubt, folks. It was never in doubt. No doubt. Yeah, I wasn't worried for 1 second, not even 0.01 of a second. Not worried at all, and I feel absolutely fantastic. So let's get started, all right? We're going to be locking up the Bidens, folks, all of them, all the Bidens. You know what they say, when you get to prison, go up to the biggest Biden and say, why are you locked up? And they'll tell you it was me. It was me. We're going to lock everybody up. Hillary, the Bidens, Nancy Pelosi, and then we're going to throw away the key. I'm going to lock up the debate moderators. Bob Woodward, he's out Planet America. They'll be locked up. Anthony Green, him too. Chuck him in there, right in the cage.
Okay, now look, good old Johnny. We spoke to Lanny Chen earlier about polling. He talked about the big black eye that the pollsters have gotten. And look, we shouldn't go too early on this because if you recall in 2018, the day of the election, it looked, oh, wow, this is really close. Yeah. The polls are all wrong. Late. And then, yeah, exactly. In the end, the Democrats won by like 9 points because after California, they had its votes and votes. California, by the way, takes 17 days.
Yeah.
To take in more ballots. Yeah. So there's a long lag time there. So, yeah, so this may change a lot. But I think it's fair to say, look, right now the popular vote so far is Biden by 1.3%. It's going to move a lot to get to 8 points, which is where the 538 average was at the beginning of the day. It might get there.
Yep.
What won't get there is Michigan with an 8-point margin, even if Biden ends up winning Michigan, which he may well, the way this is going, but 8-point margin, unlikely.
Yeah.
Wisconsin, 8-point margin, unlikely. Florida, we've already talked about that, 6 points off. What is going on? Now, they're going to talk about COVID, undoubtedly, about the fact you can't determine the sample size properly if you don't know who's going to vote, you don't know who's turning up, who's scared, whatever. Mail-in ballots, how many are being disregarded, and how many disqualified. They're going to talk about that kind of stuff. But still, how many elections in a row, presidential elections, can this happen before we've got a real problem?
Well, of course, the same thing can happen for different reasons.
Yes.
i.e. the polls can be wrong this time for a different reason to in 2016. You look at Florida. I mean, that is undoubtedly a big miss. Biden was in front. Interestingly, Biden was only just in front in the poll average from Real Clear Politics, which had a lot of those Trafalgar polls, Rasmussen polls, the pro-Trump polls, the shy Trump voter polls. They were mixed in there. So even they were tending to get it wrong. I mean, this is actually a better performance for Trump than even the sort of bullish on Trump polls. So this is not just a one pollster v another pollster issue.
It is, but Trafalgar were a lot closer than the non-Trafalgar pollsters were.
But if they've got a House effect of +3 or 4 for Republicans, that is just automatically in there for them. Well, that's great, but it doesn't mean the rest of their polling is any better. It just means that they're tacking that on. And if you look at some of the other polls, they were fine within the margin of error. Arizona, the polls had Joe Biden winning by 2.6%. Well, he's won it. We don't yet know what's going to happen in the Rust Belt until those final votes are counted. But you're right, it looks as though there may be a 3% polling miss, which can be a big deal in a close state, obviously, a very big deal, but again, within the margin of error. So that's where the pollsters will always have that little bit of an escape clause. They'll say margin of error, even in the average of polls, margin of error.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'm not jumping off the bandwagon of polling in general, but I just feel like we're getting to a point where the Trafalgar kind of polling has proven itself enough times where people should at least run alternative polls, which is a more conventional form of poll and one which is a more, just for those who don't know what we're talking about, Trafalgar is a polling company that what they say is they ask, they're very cagey about exactly what they ask, but essentially it's stuff like, who do you think your neighbours might vote for? And you don't know who your neighbours are going to vote for, but their theory is that a lot of people don't want to talk to pollsters, and if they do, they don't want to tell them the truth. And they're more likely to tell them the truth if you distance the person from the information they're giving. That's their suggestion.
It's a bit like saying, do you watch MSNBC or Fox News? And saying you watch Fox News, you're more likely to be a Republican voter or you're conservative as a result of those choices or those answers that you make. Rather than pinning people when they're going to, because of social pressure, they feel as though they can't say that they're a Trump supporter, which may well have happened in Florida, given if you think of all that money that we talked about being spent in Florida, if people are seeing all these negative ads about Trump, maybe it's the negative ads that are helping to inflame the shy Trump voter, particularly in gated communities, retirement villages, when everyone's in each other's business. You can imagine why there would be some shy Trump voters there.
Absolutely. And by the way, when I talk about running 2 different polls, some companies do that. I think it's LA Times with the University of Southern California. They run both a conventional poll and a Trafalgar-style poll, and their Trafalgar-style poll was more accurate.
Yeah.
But anyway, another miss was looking through the Votecast. They asked people their most important issue to them, and these were the numbers. You had COVID was 42% leading, and Democrats led by 52 points amongst the people who said COVID was their most important issue. Not a surprise there. Economy was 27%. Republicans led by 61 points amongst that group. Then daylight, 9% was healthcare. Democrats were ahead by 38 points amongst them. 8% was racism. Democrats were ahead by 63 points amongst them. Law enforcement was 4% was next. Republicans were ahead 59 points amongst them. So for those counting the numbers, 42 plus 9 plus 8, that's 59%, the most important issue, were Democrats dominating compared to 31% were Republicans dominating. Now, there were more issues after that, obviously, but that doesn't really add up. If you look, and also I remember Harry Anton was talking about the fact that in the history of polling, when an issue is the most important issue to voters that isn't the economy, it determines the election. Every time.
Except maybe this time.
Maybe this time.
Although as you yourself have pointed out, Chaz, it is impossible to separate out COVID and the economy. These two are interrelated and inescapable. You can't fix one without fixing the other.
And I should also say there's 2 sides to every one of these. Like you might say the reason why COVID is my most important issue is because I think it's a hoax. There are all kinds of reasons.
Exactly.
I don't want to go too hard. I'm just saying that I feel like I wouldn't want to be a pollster right now. It seems to be incredibly difficult.
If nothing else, that does prove yet again that we have 2 quite separate, conflicting information ecosystems in the United States. If you're a Democrat, you're worried about COVID, not so much the economy, shut it down if we need to save lives. If you're a Republican, you're saying we need to take some risks with lives because we need to get this economy and people's livelihoods back up and running. And they've got just such a different worldview in one country, which they're yet to reconcile on so many fronts. But we did speak to two experts about both of these issues. The pandemic with Dr. Maggie Nolan. She's in a COVID hotspot right now there in Wisconsin. And we also talked about the state of the economy right now with Professor Betsy Stevenson in Michigan. Take a look.
Well, unfortunately, we are breaking our state records. We have 241,000 cases so far, 2,100 deaths. We've been averaging the last week or so 5,000 new cases a day. The result is our hospital capacity at about 85%. 87% of our ICU beds are full. This is really troubling, especially as we go into the winter. There's things about this surge that are very different. First, this surge, at least in Wisconsin, is bigger. Second, in the United States, if 42 states are seeing surges, even if they aren't as large as Wisconsin, mobilizing resources, personnel, we can't bus in people from surrounding states in the Midwest because they're all fighting their own battle. And this is going to be a problem with therapeutics, with all sorts of resources, just because of the number of states seeing surge.
The U.S. economy is in pretty difficult straits right now. It depends on whether you're a glass half full or a glass half empty kind of person, though, how you see it. In fact, I guess I should have said 2/3 full or 1/3 empty, because we've recovered about 2/3 of the decline we saw at the very beginning stages of the pandemic. But that means we've got 1/3 to go. And to put that in perspective, our GDP today is about 3% smaller than it was a year ago. And we've got almost 23 million people still receiving unemployment insurance. So a lot of people out of work, a big hole in GDP. And frankly, I think we've done the easy part. I think for me, one of the most disturbing things we've seen is a massive decline in women's labor force participation, as moms have just found it to be way too much to manage taking care of kids at home and trying to work from home or try to find a job. We've never seen such a big, rapid decline in women, particularly in that sort of middle age. If you compare it to September 11th, it took a really long time to get people back on planes again after September 11th. I think it's going to take a really long time to get people back on planes again after the pandemic. It took a really long time after September 11th to get people to want to work in high-rise buildings again. I think we could see the same kind of problem with the pandemic. And in both those cases, I think the problem's probably worse and longer lasting.
Now, Chaz, I want to get a bit of an update from the state of Georgia. This is one where Democrats have had high hopes of maybe picking it up. Joe Biden was leading by around 1 point in the average of polls from 538. And this is a state that has not been won by a Democrat. It used to be solidly a part of the solid South for Democrats back in Jimmy Carter's day when he was governor. Bill Clinton won it in '92, but it's gone Republican ever since. What is it looking at right now?
They haven't recounted, they haven't started restarted counting, but it's 92% counted so far, 2.2% margin with Trump ahead of Biden.
Yeah, but some big districts around Atlanta that have a large African-American population and a large Democratic vote expected to be amongst that. So it's a lot of ground to make up, but still not impossible. The Reverend James Woodall is the Georgia State President of the NAACP. He's a Democrat, intelligence analyst in the US Army Reserve and a Baptist minister to boot. We spoke with Reverend Woodall from Atlanta about his view of how the president's play for the black male vote in particular has been playing out.
I really don't believe Trump has had much of an impact that he nor pollsters say he has. I'm a black man and I know black men, and majority of them are not voting for Trump. They're not voting for an agenda that is only focused on the 1%. They're not voting for people who are more committed to their proximity to power and privilege than it is the welfare of the people. And so the black men that I organize with and I talk to and I worship with and I work with and serve with in the United States Army, I know that they're more concerned about their communities. They're more concerned about their families. And some of them may vote for Trump. Maybe they do vote for Trump. But what I do know is that their motivation is not him as it relates, but it's more important to really talk about the issues about healthcare and the environment and those kind of things. And I personally, both as the state president and as an individual citizen. I know all too well the record that this administration has, and it's piss poor. And so as a black man, it is unacceptable to continue to push a narrative that suggests that black men somehow are going to come out in droves in a historic turnout for Donald Trump. That's simply just not going to happen, and I will not stand for that either.
Now, of course, the nightmare scenario, Chaz, after tonight was one of disputed ballots, lawsuits, recounts, maybe protests as well, and an election result ultimately decided by the courts. And it's certainly looking as though that could be exactly where we're heading. And, of course, it has happened before, just 20 years ago.
Election Day, the day to choose a new president for a new century.
The 2000 presidential election had been unpredictable. Democratic Vice President Al Gore lagged behind Republican Texas Governor George W. Bush for most of the campaign. But then came what passed for an October surprise in those days. News that Bush had once been pulled over for drink driving in the 1970s.
Years ago, I made some mistakes. I occasionally drank too much, and I did on that night.
The polls tightened. On election night, TV networks started calling crucial swing states for Al Gore.
But I think, Bill, and you're the maven on this one, that generally networks do not call unless they have a pretty high degree of assurance, correct?
That is correct. We have a pretty high degree of assurance that Florida and Pennsylvania have gone for Al Gore.
But not so fast.
Stand by. CNN right now is moving our earlier declaration of Florida back to the too close to call column.
Then, 4 hours later...
George Bush is the president-elect of the United States. He has won the state of Florida, according to our projections. 25 electoral votes. NBC News projects that George Bush, it's been a night of first giving it to Al Gore, then taking it away on the part of the networks.
Gore called Bush to concede, but as the counting in Florida got closer, again, Gore called Bush back and retracted the concession. The next morning, the result was still unclear because a lot of the ballots were unclear.
Vote-o-matic machines and conflicting rules about ballots and fuzzy rules about what is a vote.
It's slightly detached.
Democrats charge a confusing ballot layout led voters to think they were punching the ballot for Al Gore when they were actually voting for Reform Party candidate Pat Buchanan.
When the counting finished, Al Gore had won the national popular vote by over 500,000, but Bush led in Florida by 1,784 votes total. Florida law required a machine recount. That reduced Bush's lead to just 327 votes, but those counting machines couldn't read the presidential preference on 170,000 ballots. 60,000 of them were what's called an undervote, where the voter hadn't clearly punched through the box, leaving a hanging chad or a dimpled chad. The other 110,000 were overvotes, where the voter may have punched for Bush or Gore cleanly, but wrote in their name as well. Court cases flew thick and fast. Gore demanded a partial hand recount in counties he expected to do well in. Lawyers for Bush and Gore fought over those chads and the postmarks on mail-in ballots as well. As the deadline to certify the results loomed, the Florida Supreme Court ordered a statewide hand recount. Then, 4 days later, the US Supreme Court stepped in.
Get it in your mind, first of all, the Supreme Court of the United States has reversed the orders of the Florida Supreme Court on a very narrow majority, 5 justices to 4.
It was over. George W. Bush was 537 votes in front, and that became his winning margin, not just for Florida, but the presidency as well, claiming the Electoral College with 271 to 266 for Al Gore. It wasn't until over a year later that a University of Chicago study announced that had all 170,000 undervotes and overvotes been counted, Gore would have won by between 60 and 171 votes. It was still so close, but by then America had been attacked on 9/11 and had launched a war to oust the Taliban from Afghanistan, a war which continues today.
Planet America, fake Oval Office, fake news, fake host. Who are these guys?
And fake Donald Trump as well, Johnny D. Domenico. Now, Chaz, one of the things about